When is the right time to sell a stock? How do you protect against inflation? Financial decisions can be tricky. Your cognitive and emotional biases can lead you astray. Financial Decoder, an original podcast from Charles Schwab, can help. Listen at schwab.com/financial decoder.
Calling all dog owners. Your furry friend deserves top-notch nourishment, and Ollie delivers the clean, fresh nutrition your dog needs in 5 flavors they'll absolutely flip over. Ollie is made in U.S. kitchens with ingredients carefully sourced from trusted growers and producers around the world, with absolutely no harmful fillers or preservatives. With protein-first recipes like fresh beef with sweet potatoes, fresh turkey with blueberries, or fresh lamb with cranberries, you might start thinking, dang, my dog eats better than I do. And that's probably true when it comes to Ollie. Give your pup a fresh start this new year by letting them taste test a personalized meal plan with Ollie. Head to ollie.com/Wondery. Tell them all about your dog and use code WONDERY to get 60% off your first box of meals when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a clean bowl guarantee on the first box. So if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/Wondery and enter code WONDERY to get 60% off your first box. Start your dog's new year off right with Ollie. Start your dog's new year off right with Ollie.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Wondery.
So my hope is to shine a light on that, on things like this that are happening, where the family members of murder victims are just thrown to the side. At this point, the DA's office will not even return my calls. I can call asking them for help. I can email them asking for help, and they won't respond. And that's retribution for speaking out. But what else am I supposed to do? When I see things that are happening that aren't right, you have to say something. Like you said, if I hadn't spoken out, all you would be seeing is articles about this poor, wrongfully convicted man. And that's all you would see. And a point is that there is a case possibly to be made for his innocence, but it wasn't conducted correctly. If he's truly innocent, bring out all the evidence to the judge, all of it, and let's let her decide.
That's Kristina Byington, whose cousin, a young college student named Anita Byington, was murdered in 1991 in Austin, Texas. This is the Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair. Kristina Byington was 26 years old when her first cousin, a college student named Anita Byington, went out with friends in Austin, Texas on a Saturday night in late August. The following morning, Anita was found brutally beaten to death in a grassy area behind a building in an East Austin apartment complex. Law enforcement initially said they believed that Anita, a student in her junior year at Southwest Texas State University, located between Austin and San Antonio, had been at clubs on Austin 6th Street Saturday with friends who worked for the Texas legislature. The police believed Anita gave one of those friends a ride. The man would later tell police that he had last saw Anita at 3 a.m. The police were unsure of what happened between then and when her body was discovered 3.5 hours later. Kathleen Feit, an associate professor at Southwest Texas State University, told a local paper Anita's death was a, quote, tragic loss of life. Feit said she wanted to do the very best. Everything I could say would be positive. She was a beautiful girl, very, very attractive. She gave good eye contact, and that encouraged others to listen to her. A month before Anita's death, a 23-year-old shoe store manager named Michelle Lisa Wagner was last seen at a North Austin country and western club and was found the next day in a creek 8 miles away. A man would be arrested in that crime a month after Anita's body was found, but based on newspaper accounts, the city was on high alert. Law enforcement began to circle in on suspects as a rosary was recited at Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Fall Forest, the South Texas town where many of Anita's relatives lived. Arrests would soon be made by the time her funeral mass was celebrated the next day. Within days, by Tuesday, the police said an attempted drug deal may have triggered Anita's death when they arrested 26-year-old Alan Andre Cowsey and 24-year-old Bobby Harrell Jr., a resident of the apartment complex. Both men were charged with intentional murder. The Austin American-Statesman newspaper reported that Cowsey told police that the two men confronted Byington in the parking lot and, quote, a disagreement over crack cocaine ensued. The paper said that the police affidavit said that Anita attempted to flee but was physically stopped by the men and died of a head injury at about 5:30 a.m. Physical evidence included blood that was found on nearby concrete. Ultimately, prosecutors concluded that there was not enough evidence to prosecute Harrell, although law enforcement remained steadfast about his involvement. Cowsey, prosecutors said, confessed to the murder. He would later say, though, that he was tricked into the confession. The defense attempted to have the confession suppressed at trial and failed to have the case overturned based on those grounds. Within 7 days of his trial beginning, it had concluded. The jury deliberated for 12 hours and convicted Cowsey. The punishment phase of the trial was held, and Cowsey was sentenced to 50 years in prison for Anita's death. Kristina grew up with the rest of her Mexican-American family in Fall Forest, a middle child who is the daughter of two educators. Both Kristina's brothers became attorneys. Kristina said that growing up, Anita, who is an only child, was more than a cousin, but like a sister. Now, in addition to caring for her elderly mother, Kristina has taken the uncomfortable position of being the family's advocate in a nightmare that opened up 31 years after Anita died. That's when, in 2022, the elected Travis County, Texas District Attorney, Jose Garza, a reform-minded prosecutor, partnered with the Innocence Project of Texas in what the family felt was a politically motivated, one-sided effort to get Cowsey released. The situation is reminiscent of the recent case of the murder of Heyman Lee, an 18-year-old Woodlawn, Maryland woman whose boyfriend, Adnan Syed, was convicted of her 1999 murder. After the 2014 Serial podcast cast doubts on Syed's guilt, he became one of several darlings of the conviction integrity and innocence movements focused on overturning wrongful convictions. Many of Syed's appeals were swatted down until a trial court judge 2 years ago vacated his conviction and released him. That decision was reversed earlier this year by the Maryland Supreme Court on the grounds that the judge and the prosecutor seeking to vacate Syed's convictions trampled on Lee's family's rights. Texas has no similar law to Maryland's Declaration on Victims' Rights. Now Kristina spends her days advocating during the judicial review of Cowsey's conviction. Today, we're going to discuss what it's like to be a victim's family member, what it's like to find the sense of peace only to have it taken away, and what it's like decades later to still fight for a family member and a friend who's long gone. Hey, Kristina, I just wanted to thank you for joining. I know it takes a lot probably to have conversations like this. You know, it's probably emotionally exhausting and difficult to be able to talk about topics like this. We had the opportunity to connect with each other online through true crime communities. And, you know, I have watched in the background as you've talked about your cousin's story. And, you know, I know that things like this are so difficult and painful. So I appreciate your willingness not only to fight for justice for your cousin, but also to share the experience with other people, because I think it's so important, in any coverage, whether it's true crime or otherwise, for us as people to understand what it's like to be affected by it. So thanks for coming on. I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your interest in this story.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's not, one of the things that I've realized over time that when you have, innocence cases or cases where there's an argument about innocence, we rarely get the opportunity to actually talk to the victim's family members, regardless of how they feel about the innocence or not. They're often very much in the background. And I think, it is somewhat unique to have a voice out here like this. But one of the things I think when we tackle issues like this that we forget to do is we often talk about the crime. We often talk about the trial and the events afterwards, but sometimes we don't talk enough about the person who was lost. So I wanted to start by asking you just a little bit about what Anita was like and what your relationship with each other was like, because I knew you grew up together and just what that was like and what she was like.
Well, she was 4 years younger than I was, but she was the boss in our relationship. Even though she was younger, she had that type of personality. She was real funny, mischievous. She had the most amazing laugh. She was just always in for some fun. Just always laughing. She was an only child, and I didn't have any sisters, so to me, she was like my little sister, and she had no siblings. So she lived in Houston, which is quite a ways away from where I live. But every time, they'd come down here often, to visit family and everything. And I can remember just counting down the minutes, waiting for them to get here, and then we'd go to our grandmother's house and have slumber parties and, tell secrets, things like that. Just the best times. I mean, I have so many wonderful memories from those times. We'd stay up late giggling, things like that. We'd go to the beach every summer and spend a week, both of our families, with everybody, cousins, grandparents, everybody. And those were just the best times of my life. If I could go back to any time in my life, it would be one day, 1 hour there at the beach
Mm.
with everyone. And in all this time, I've never been back to the beach, and it's been 33 years.
Wow, where'd you guys go?
South Padre,
Okay, okay.
near
And you've
Brown.
never,
I've never been back.
yeah, down by Brownsville,
Yep.
along south of Galveston, and all the way down on the
Yep.
border with Mexico. Why haven't you gone back?
It would have been too painful. My memories there are of her, and then it was just too hard. And then now I think I'm ready to go back, but gosh, it's just, and that same condo that we stayed at is still there. And I need to go back, but it feels like if I went back, it would be like facing all these ghosts, because our grandmother, her parents now, my dad now, my brother, all of these people that were there, they're no longer with us, and
Mm,
but I feel like I need to go back. I really do.
yeah. The it's hard to like revisit. I remember after 9/11 because I was there on the day of September 11th and several other places I can think about, but it took me years to go back to ground zero after
Yeah.
I left New York. And I would literally, on my first few trips back, I would like go downtown, go to City Hall, and then like literally walk around ground zero, like a really far way to avoid it. But I did find some healing when I finally was able to do it, but it took decades. I mean, it was only until like recently that I was able to do it. So when you guys were growing up, it sounds like you had brothers, right?
Two brothers, yes.
So you had two brothers. She was an only child. So it was really like you two were sisters to each other. What do you know about like her hopes and her dreams for growing up?
She wanted to be a teacher, and she was studying to be a teacher. She liked working with kids. I believe she had a part-time job at a daycare center, and she loved it with little kids, and So that's what she was studying for. She wanted to be a teacher.
Hmm, that's nice. And then, she was living in Houston. You guys were on the other side of the state in the southwest part of the state. How often did you guys see each other?
Yeah, I saw her probably around once a month, maybe more or less, sometimes more, sometimes less. And when she was older, when they'd come to town, I'd take her to school with me. So she met my friends. She'd go riding around with me because she was 4 years younger. I was in high school and she was still a little kid, so she wanted to go everywhere with me. And so, yeah, we saw each other pretty often. I would say at least once a month.
So you were like really not just a sister, but you were like a big sister to her. She
Yes, I always looked out for her, always.
Yeah. Yeah. What kinds of things can you remember? Just making sure she was safe or smart about things, or
Yeah, things like that, making sure she was safe. Like I would see older guys, hitting on her and stuff like that, and I just made sure to keep a really close eye on her because she was my little cousin, my little sister. That's how I felt about her, and I would protect her over anyone.
yeah, I get that. It's kind of the way I felt about my brother when growing up. Like I was probably not a particularly temperamental person, but like if you cross the line with my brother, it's always what would get me. So, Anita went off to college. She was still sort of like away from where you were. How did you find out that she had been murdered? Do you remember what you first heard?
Yes, I was living in Edinburgh, Texas, which is an hour south of here, and I didn't have a phone. And it was in the afternoon, and I was asleep because I worked overnights at that time. And I heard pounding on my door, and it was one of my closest friends. And she said, "Hey, I came to take you to Falfurrias." And in my head, I'm thinking, no, I'm going to work tonight. I'm not going to Falfurrias. And she said, Anita was murdered. And I
Mm,
just remember being, what? And I remember even asking her, is she dead? And she said, yes, we need to go. And I remember going to a payphone and trying to call my parents, and busy, trying to call my grandmother, busy, trying to find out anything because I couldn't imagine murdered. So we drove back here, and it was like an hour drive. And I remember on the drive talking about everything other than that, like nothing had happened. I think I was in shock, because we were just talking about ordinary things, and that struck me as so odd. And then we got to my grandmother's house, and my parents were there and a lot of other people. And as soon as I saw my grandmother, I just lost it, started crying. And that's when it became a real thing for me.
mm. Did you guys end up going to Austin at that time, or did you? What
No,
happened next?
no, my brother did, maybe a day after the funeral or something, to go get her car from the police station and clean out her apartment and things like that. But no, the first night we were just there at my grandmother's, and it's a small town, so a lot of people start gathering, and the next, I remember calling her parents that night and just not knowing what to say at all. And then the next day, they were coming in from Houston, and we all met at the funeral home where we were waiting for them to bring her from Austin. And some of us went in to see her. And my mother kept saying, don't go. I said, no, I need to go in there. Come with me. And she said, no. But she followed me in there, and I have very little memory of it. I just remember walking in there and seeing her. And my mother was behind me, and she said that she thought I was falling backwards. That's how severe my reaction was,
Mm,
because her body had not been fixed up or anything. And so I was in there just less than a minute. Her mother was in there for hours with her. It's just, yeah, I'll never
yeah.
forget that.
And so, what was it like for the family in the aftermath in terms of waiting for some kind of answers? Because I know usually when something like this happens, the family has little more than what you see in the local newspaper.
I remember her father either coming to the house or calling my father saying they got him, he confessed. And that's all we knew at the time, that somebody had confessed.
And how did it unfold after that? I've always been curious in cases like this. Did the police and law enforcement, did they tell you things before they were announced publicly, or did you find out when everybody else found out because it was in the newspaper or a press conference? How did that work?
I'm not exactly sure. Her parents were the ones who talked to law enforcement and the DA's office and all that. And they didn't really discuss the case openly. It wasn't something that we would bring up unless they told us something. So I'm not exactly sure how everything was handled back then, but I do know that they knew somebody had been arrested, I believe, before it was out in the news.
Yeah. And did you all eventually go down for the trial?
I wasn't able to go down, but a lot of other people did. My parents did. One of my brothers, um, Anita's closest friend, who is friends with me now and has been helping me with this, she went to every single day of the trial. A lot of family members were there, and a lot of her friends were there.
And she, from what I had read when I was looking at the newspaper, it sounds like she had, she was out that night with friends who were working, I think some of them in the Texas legislature, but I read some of the quotes about her, and it sounds like she had a broad group of friends, but also a broad group of older people like her teachers and professors who saw a ton of potential in her. Is that accurate?
Yes. And I remember at her funeral, there was outside of the church, there were like 2 long lines of her friends that came from San Marcos and Houston. Just a whole lot of them standing there as we walked in, which I thought was such a nice thing.
When you, over the years, so eventually it takes about a year for it to go to trial, right?
Yes, it was almost exactly a year
before it went to trial. And then, you mentioned that some of your family members actually went to the trial and kind of absorbed what was happening there. And eventually, like relatively quickly, there was a conviction and a sentence of
50 years.
Of at least one of the 2 potential suspects,
Yes.
right? Because Andre Kazi was one, and then his friend who lived in the apartment complex was also one of the suspects, but they just ended up charging Kazi with it. What did it feel like? Because I've always wondered, one of the things that I've really believed is like when somebody loses someone, period, to anything, but particularly to a violent crime, there's no complete closure. There's no complete justice, because justice would be getting the person back.
Right.
But what did it feel like at that time? Was there some sort of feeling or sense of relief?
Oh, yes, there was. I mean, 50 years, and that was a relief. Okay, somebody's going to pay for this. And in my head, this is probably wrong, but all these years hoping that he didn't have an easy time in there,
Mm.
Yeah, and I know that's probably wrong, but that's the way I felt.
Well, what did you mean by that? That is it like the idea of, because we talk about the idea of like prison, right? And part of prison is the purpose is rehabilitation. The purpose is also incapacitation, so the person can't hurt other people. Part of the reason why people go to prison is literally punishment, right? Retribution
Right.
for their actions. We talk about the because I think it's comfortable for us to talk about things like rehabilitation, incapacitation. Deterrence is another part of it, right? For the public deterrence. And the final piece is punishment. And I think we tend to shy away from the punishment part of it, but I really do believe that like a part of justice is also retribution. But when you lose someone to murder, there's almost no retribution that would be great enough to feel like justice.
Yeah, there's none. And yeah, the thought of punishment was in my mind, during these years. I mean, honestly, I was hoping that he'd never get out,
What do you mean by that?
that he would spend the rest of his life in prison.
Mm. That the 50 years would cover the rest of his life.
Right.
Yeah. When the case was, the sentence went down, he got the 50 years, and you guys began to sort of like move on with your lives. You never, that's the thing about grief that I've learned. Like, you never get past it. You always live with your grief, because I just posted this card recently on Facebook that's a quote from my dad. My mom died in October, and he had just made a comment. We were talking about grief, and he had said, grief is just love that has nowhere to go. And so it really got me thinking that grief really never ends. It's about finding peace in your grief, not getting past your grief. What was it like after the sort of bustle of the case was over and you guys were still dealing with your grief? What was that like?
It was difficult. I remember sleeping with my lights on for months, being afraid of strangers. I guess that's how murder impacts you, and so your grief is intertwined with this horror. It's a different kind of grief than, say, if somebody died in an accident or of an illness, which is still just as bad, and the grief is still strong. But with murder, there's just an aspect of horror that is always going to be in your grief.
Yeah, because there's the extra fear. I was talking to somebody actually on the podcast whose cousin was murdered by a serial killer who has not been caught, identified.
Oh,
People know who it is, but he's not been caught. And she said that it like transformed her life. And she remembers this one moment where she was walking down the street in a city out on the West Coast, and she saw this like 16-year-old girl about a little younger than her cousin at the time. And she had her headphones in and she was just merrily walking down the street, not paying attention to anyone or anything. And she ran over to the woman before she could even think about it and sort of like shook her and said, "You have to pay attention to where you are." And one of the things we were talking about is like when you experience something like a murder, it changes the way that you look at everything in the world. Like things that may have been just sort of like gentle or friendly, like meeting a new person, may have a different element of caution or fear or other aspects. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
yes, yeah. Watching a movie and seeing somebody get beaten up, you know, or anything like that, it comes up a lot. And for a long while, it lasted a good while, and then it fades a little bit. And it's in the back of your head, it's always there. She was murdered, she's gone. It's always there, but I guess you just learn to cope with it. And it's like on a back burner, kind of. But now with this coming back, it's almost as if she got killed again now. It just brings everything back to the forefront.
How did you find out that the case was being challenged?
One of the witnesses in the case, one of the girls that was with her that night, called me in December of 22 and said that she had gotten a call from the DA's office and they wanted to talk to her about the murder case, but they wouldn't give any information. And so we didn't know what the heck was going on. And then the other girl that was with them that night, she got a visit from a lawyer from the Innocence Project and an investigator with the DA's office together. And they left.
That's the Innocence Project of
Of
Texas,
Texas.
And an investigator from the district attorney's office?
Right.
Both
And
together? Okay.
together. And that was confusing to me because I said, aren't they usually on opposite sides? Why would they be wanting to interview a witness together? And and I had a picture of both of the cards that they had left there. And so I went on Facebook and looked up the Innocence Project of Texas, scrolled down a little bit, and there's a post of Kazi and his wife smiling. And, they were using him as a fundraiser, donate here so that our clients can be home for the holidays with their families. And it was just horrific seeing his picture there. We had no idea that anything was happening with the case. Nobody notified us.
So that's what I was going to ask. It sounds like from what you're saying, by the time you guys found out, and you didn't find out directly, nobody had come to you. By the time you found out, obviously the Innocence Project of Texas had looked into the case, and it kind of makes sense they wouldn't say anything about it. But they had obviously gone to the DA, and the DA had done some kind of investigating on their part if they were showing up together with the Innocence Project. And no one from the family had been notified. Is that a normal thing that the families wouldn't be notified if someone's looking at the integrity of a conviction?
I don't know. I asked what happened was, so that same week after I saw that, I called the investigator because I had the card, and she explained a little bit what was going on. And I asked her, why wasn't any family notified? And she said, we couldn't find any family. But I told her, but we're registered in the system. I'm registered in the system. So I would get notifications every time he was up for parole, anything like that. Myself, my brother, and several other relatives, we're all in the system as her relatives. So in my opinion, they didn't try. In my opinion, they wanted to get this exoneration through, as smoothly as possible with no pushback from the family. So the easiest thing for them to say is, "Oh, we weren't aware of any family."
Mm. Do you have any idea what caused them to reopen the case?
I believe he had written to the Innocence Project, and the DA's office got some sort of grant to work with the Innocence Project on certain cases spanning within certain years to reinvestigate these cases. So I believe that's how it started.
Were these all cases that related to the detective who had been working Kazi's case, or was it broader than that?
I believe they were related to Detective Polanco.
Okay. So they were so to some extent they may have been reinvestigating all of Polanco's cases. What did the investigators tell you at that point about, once you did contact them, about what the process was going to be like, or were they going to come out and talk to you guys, or what did they tell you at that point?
She told me that they were reinvestigating, and she made it seem like it was a technicality, because at one point she told me, even if an inmate writes us a letter, we have to reinvestigate. That's what she told me, and so I wasn't sure what to make of all this. She did say that they were going to be looking at DNA. And at that point, I said, well, that's great, because maybe they'll find something on Bobby Harrell after all these years. And I told her that I would like to be as involved as possible in this in this case, and to be updated frequently as to what was happening. And she said, sure. And she asked me if I wanted to speak with the DA in charge and the assistant DA in charge of this case. And I said, yes. In fact, I had already left her a message. And this was in December of 2022. And 8 months went by, and I heard nothing from them at all. And later on, once we got some documents, we learned that during that time, they were working on this case, having secret hearings with the judge, signing off on certain aspects of his innocence already. But they portrayed it to me like, well, we're just investigating, and we haven't made any determination on as to his innocence or guilt, and just I mean, they were just lying because we have documents, signed documents from months before, so it's been a mess ever since the start with the DA's office.
What happened at that 8-month point?
The witness called me again, and she told me they called me again this morning because they're having a hearing in front of a judge this afternoon. This was in October of 23. And
Wow.
and nobody had called us or anything. It had been 10 months, so I had to start calling them back myself.
Do you know why they called her? Did they want her to appear at the hearing? Is that
They
what it was?
wanted to interview her because she was with her that night. And see, they're trying to pin everything on Kevin Harris. So they're trying to get anything they can on Kevin Harris, who
And
was
Kevin Harris is the
alternate suspect.
man. Yeah, but he was the one that he was out with him that night, and she had given him a ride to his vehicle, which was in that apartment complex. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know where his vehicle. No, his vehicle wasn't there.
Okay.
It was somewhere else.
Okay.
That's one of the things is they're trying to say that Kevin Harris is a sole murderer. He took her to this random apartment complex, raped her there, and murdered her there at some random apartment complex where he didn't live. It doesn't make sense.
Hmm. And so he had been a witness who he had been with all of them that night. He had been a witness initially in the beginning, and they had said, it was like 3 a.m. or 3:30 a.m. was the last time he saw her, and then somewhere between then and 6:30 in the morning, or she had been killed. Did you guys ever wonder whether he was involved in it?
Not to my recollection. Um, the only thing that we always thought, and I believe the police and the prosecutors always thought, was that he was lying. He changed his story several times. He had a cut on his arm the next day. Um, I've always believed that he was with her. I don't know exactly what happened, but he took her there. He was trying to make some sort of drug deal. When things went bad, he fled and left her there to be killed.
And that she got caught
Right.
by the dealers. So I'm assuming at this point, you know about the hearing. You've reached out to them. They've asked her friend to testify. Did they get back to you before the hearing?
Yes, at that time, I started talking to the DA's office on a more regular basis. In fact, they offered to come here to where I live. I believe 2 or 3 of them were going to come, talk to me, show me some of the stuff, I guess. And I asked them if my lawyer could be present. And once they found out who my lawyer was, they canceled the meeting.
What do you mean?
They refused to meet with me.
Why?
Well, my attorney was the original prosecutor in the case back in 92. And so they're saying, well, he's a witness and this and that. And we said, okay, well, we'll meet without him then. No problem. And they refused.
So did you get the feeling they just didn't want him anywhere near it?
Oh, yes, because he showed up with us on the day of the first hearing, which was November 27th. And so we were in the audience at the hearing. And at one point, the judge started asking the defense, okay, and y'all have kept the family updated and notified and this and that. And Terry Keel, who is my attorney, he stood up and started talking and saying no, that they had not, and that there was a family member who would like to speak, who would like to testify. And it just caused a big ruckus in the courtroom. In fact, the judge had to tell them to act professionally because one of the attorneys from the Innocence Project started yelling at him and accusing him of misconduct and all kinds of stuff. And they were fighting so that I could not give a statement in court. And the judge did allow me to make a statement, but it would not be on the record. But shortly, right then and there, they decided to name him as a witness in the case so that he could not be allowed to go to any more hearings. And so he had to leave then and there and was not allowed to attend any of the hearings and was never called as a witness.
Did you all as family members attend the rest of the hearings?
Yes, we went to every single one, and So many of her friends showed up, and this is 33 years after the fact, and so many family members. We had a large crowd there, and it was very touching to see that she's not been forgotten by any of
Yeah.
us.
So do you, in thinking about what you know about the evidence, what they showed, what you heard about the hearings, is there ever a moment where you wondered that whether he was potentially innocent, or would you even be open to the idea that he might be innocent?
Yes, I mean, you have to be, because I have no interest in, an innocent man serving time for something that he didn't do. If if I believed he was innocent, I would be so vocal about that, but what I did was I got my hands on every document that I could get my hands on, the trial transcript, everything. And I went through the trial transcript and I started taking notes. And I would mark down everything that pointed to Kazi's guilt from the trial transcript. And just from that, I have pages and pages and pages. If anything, this investigation just affirmed my belief in his guilt. There's just too much evidence which leads directly to him for me to believe he's innocent. For me to believe that he's innocent, there's a lot of questions that would need to be answered adequately. And in these hearings, none of this was brought out. They since both sides were fighting for the same side, they can decide what to present to the judge in the hearings. And anything that incriminated Kazi was, of course, left out.
And that's a interesting thing about it. And I wanna get back and ask you about what convinced you, but you made me think of something, that the movement toward, and I'm not even talking about innocence projects, but I'm thinking more about DA's offices for like the last decade have been setting up these conviction integrity units, like in Baltimore, when you have something like the gun trace task force, who are found to doing corrupt things, including locking up people who didn't need to be locked up. These conviction integrity units can step in and they can review cases. But one of the real challenges is that if a prosecutor's conviction integrity unit is looking into something, there are only really two people. You've got the defense attorneys for the person who's been convicted, you've got the prosecutors. If they're looking into it and they're on the same page, there are only two places where real pushback can come from. The police can say, hey, we disagree with you, prosecutor. We think this is solid. And then the other group, but they have no voice, right? Because the police aren't going to be represented in court. And then the other voice is the victim's family members, who don't always in every state have the right to official representation. They're not really parties to it. And I was going to ask you, before I asked you a little bit about his guilt, do you think that from the perspective of a legal system, if we're going to explore, which, you made the point before, you wouldn't want an innocent person in there. If we're going to explore these cases, one of the failings seems to be that once the prosecutors and the defense attorneys on the same side, the adversarial process is dead.
Right.
No one's asking questions. Do you think there's a better way to do this?
There must be, because that's exactly what happened in our case. None of the witnesses are cross-examined or asked tough questions or investigated or anything. So there's nobody in there fighting for the victim.
It must have been heartening for you to see, in August, when the Maryland Supreme Court, in the murder of Heyman Lee, who was the 18-year-old who was murdered in 1999 in Woodlawn, Maryland, and her, former boyfriend Adnan Syed was convicted of her murder in 2000. Then the conviction was overturned in vacated in 2022. And then the Maryland appellate courts and finally the Supreme Court basically said, reversed it and reinstated the conviction. And the core argument that the Maryland Supreme Court made based on their Constitution and their Declaration of Human Rights was that the core reason based on Maryland law was that the victims' families' rights were trampled on.
Ready to prioritize yourself in the new year? Your skin is a great place to start. Dime Beauty, founded by a master esthetician, is more than just a skincare company. With 4 skin-conscious categories, skincare, beauty, body care, and fragrance, Dime offers simple, spa-worthy products that will help you enter 2025 with confidence. Whether you're revitalizing your regimen with nourishing products or building one from scratch, Dime makes it easy. The Work System, our all-in-one best-selling routine, includes a cleanser of your choice, toner, serums, and moisturizers, taking the guesswork out of skincare for your healthiest, happiest skin yet. Dime's commitment to clean ingredients and sustainable packaging ensures every product is as gentle on your skin as it is on the planet. With thousands of glowing 5-star reviews and a loyal community, the results speak for themselves. Revive your skin and give yourself the routine refresh you deserve by visiting dimebeautyco.com. That's dimebeautyco.com. Your best skin awaits.
Life can change in an instant. My brother-in-law died suddenly, leaving behind my sister and her 2 young kids. He didn't have life insurance, so now they're facing the unthinkable, leaving their home. After seeing what they went through, I immediately called SelectQuote to get life insurance for my family. In 15 minutes, a licensed insurance agent compared policies from highly rated carriers to find me the right coverage in my budget. I got a $500,000 policy for only $16 a month. Plus, I qualified for same-day life insurance. No medical exam was required, and I was covered by the time I hung up. Even if you have a health concern, SelectQuote agents can find you the right policy at the lowest price. And while you can't prepare emotionally for a loss, SelectQuote can give you peace of mind with life insurance. Don't wait until it's too late.
Go to SelectQuote.com to get your free quote today. That's SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote.com. Details on example rate at SelectQuote.com.
And so, they've set a precedent that's really strong in Maryland, which basically says that if you try to vacate a conviction, the victim's family not only has the right to be heard, but they have the right to be heard on the merits. And what they mean by that is on the actual evidence, that they essentially become a party to the case. And I know every state doesn't have that, but is that something that you kind of hope for in Texas and other states, that you actually can not only be heard off the record or even on the record, but that you get the opportunity to look into the evidence and respond to it like they can now do in Maryland?
Yeah, I saw that, and that was astounding. I would hope that other states would also, pick that up, because you're right. We were not a party to this case, so we had nothing. We couldn't say anything, in court. The only thing we could do is file an amicus brief, but on behalf of the family. But other than that, there was nothing we could do at all.
Because I wonder whether, while I think it can be a good thing to go back and look at cases, I wonder whether we really need to think in different ways about the victims' families. I was going to jump back to what we were talking about before, too. What is it that convinced you when you did your research? What was it that convinced you or got you to the point, I guess, because I think that's the way that you put it, that got you to the point where there would have to be a lot of answers for you to believe in his innocence?
Well, the first thing, and I remember this from back when it happened, when Causey testified at the pretrial hearing. This was in December of 1991. They asked him on the stand, were you threatened? And he said no, and he said that he wasn't able to read his confession and he didn't know what he was signing. So that was his defense at the time. So basically saying that the police fabricated and typed out his confession and he just signed it without knowing what he was signing. This was in December of 91. By July of 92, when the trial was going to start, Sergeant Polanco had been in the news regarding other cases. all of a sudden, Kazi's defense changed to, I was coerced by Polanco.
And what was it that Polanco was accused of by that point? I know
False confessions, coercion, things like that.
Yeah, because I had read about like at least two instances. One where there was believed that he had extracted false confessions in the really famous murder that I think happened the same year in Austin or around the same time. They call it the yogurt shop. It was I can't believe this is yogurt. Where four girls, I think they were between the age of 13 and 17, were found dead at night in a yogurt shop when a police officer had seen that there was a fire. And, I know those convictions were overturned. The confessions were false. There was one other one that I had read about where he was able to extract a confession from a man about maybe, I think it was killing his wife or his girlfriend, who wasn't actually dead. And that's the one that really, really, really caught their attention. So as these things were coming out, are you saying you think Kazi's defense shifted their strategy to match kind of what this detective had done in other cases?
Completely. Because he was on the stand and they asked him, were you threatened? And he said no. Plain and simple. Then by the time July rolled around, I was coerced by Polanco, which means I was coerced and I confessed. But before he said the confession was fabricated and he couldn't read it. But yet when on the stand, he read a portion of his confession out loud without any trouble.
So that these kinds of things, like when you're listening to what the current argument is right now, it gives you a lot of doubt about.
Yeah, that I remember thinking it even way back then. I didn't have access to the transcript back then, but now that I do, I mean, there's so much. Him, driving around the crime scene so suspiciously that two separate people wrote down his license plate. Him getting out of the car and telling strangers, I didn't kill that girl, but I called the police, which he didn't. Things like that. Another thing that came out in the hearings, and the judge mentioned this in her recommendation, where he was at the jail and he said something like, I was with him, but I didn't kill nobody. I'm getting locked up for something I didn't do. Now, his own defense brought out that statement. To me, that statement corroborates his confession down to the T. I mean, I was with him. Well, who is the him? It would have to be Bobby Harrell, because supposedly he didn't know Kevin Harris. And in his confession, he's pretty much saying that Harrell was the main participant in the murder and he just helped him. So that statement, I was with him, but I didn't kill him. He didn't say we were nowhere near a girl or we didn't do anything. He didn't say that. He said, I was with him, but I didn't kill nobody.
I know that for you, you're probably, going to be spending a lot of time, focused on the case. And I know recently a trial court judge said, hey, you haven't given me enough evidence to prove his innocence. And there's going to be appeal related to that and other hearings related to that. So I imagine a bulk of your time is going to be spent advocating for Anita right now. But can you imagine a day once this is resolved where you're fighting for victims' rights more broadly?
Yes. I created a group called Travis County Crime Victims Rise Against DA Jose Garza, where other families who have gone through similar experiences, and there's a whole lot of them, crime victims, family members of murder victims who have been treated horribly by this DA's office. And so I'm looking into taking online courses for victims advocacy and things like that, and planning to stay involved.
Did you ever think, after all that had happened before and the more than 30 years that passed in between, that after fighting for justice for Anita, that 30 years later, more than 30 years later, you'd be fighting for justice for her again?
No, I never could have imagined this ever. It's it's been really traumatizing going through this. I keep notes and stuff, and I mean, going through them, you just see like nightmare last night, another nightmare about hearings, or another nightmare about Anita trying to help her. It's just constant now. The dreams now, like I had them at the beginning, now they're back, very frequent. It just it's severely traumatizing.
I imagine that it's like hard for you at times to even explain to people what it feels like. How do you get comfort, support, and take care of your mental health?
Well, I have a lot of friends who are very supportive. Not a lot of friends. I have my friends that I have are close friends. That's a better way to word it. And they're very supportive. Um, Anita's friends too. I've become friends with some of them. And so some of us, we're all going through this together, and it helps a lot.
Yeah, I didn't even think about the idea that, like, when someone dies in a situation like this, it's not just their family, it's all the people who loved or cared about them, people who knew them or were touched by them in some way, that there's an opportunity for you guys to be in it together, I guess.
And to see, like, her closest friend, she probably wouldn't want me to mention her name, but to see, her still caring as much as she did back then. She was more like a family member to her than just a friend. It just amazes me that, I'm family, so I'm in the thick of this, but so are others who are not related just because they cared that much.
And that's the thing about, like, love. It's a powerful thing. It's amazing, like, to see that you can lose someone 20, 30, 40 years ago and people still love them. They carry them in their hearts.
Yeah. And I would think, for just friends, it just kind of become a faded memory or whatever. But no, these friends that she had were real friends. For them to be so invested all these years later, that's rare, and it's a beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, and it sounds like it gives you strength too.
Yes, quite a
Mm.
bit. And the original prosecutor as well, Terry Keel, without him, I don't know where we'd be. And he just helped us because it was the right thing to do.
I was gonna just sort of like give you a chance to have some closing thoughts, because I think this is really, I mean, this is particularly helpful for me, and I imagine for more people to understand what the experience is like for somebody who's going through this. Because often, when you, let's say, Google somebody and there's a claim of wrongful conviction, often you won't even see like the murder of X, Y, or Z. You'll just see stories about the wrongful conviction. So I think this is really helpful. But I want to give you this chance for any closing thoughts. But I also wanted to see, you know, what are your hopes and dreams for this situation, and your hopes and dreams for not just the families, as you pointed out, but all the loved ones of victims who are going through what I guess is a necessary process of reexamining cases. But what are your hopes and dreams for those who love the victims, and what can we do better as a society and a legal system?
Well, like in Travis County, my hope is that people see how things are being conducted with the DA's office there. You know, for example, when I first started speaking to them and asking them about the case and everything, and I would say, like, well, what do the police officers say? The 4 police officers who were there the night he confessed. Well, they hadn't bothered to contact any of them, you know? So to me, they had an agenda with this case from day one to exonerate him, regardless of the evidence. And they conducted their investigation with that in mind. And that's not justice, you know? So my hope is to shine a light on that, on things like this that are happening, where the family members of murder victims are just thrown to the side. At this point, the DA's office will not even return my calls. I can call asking them for help. I can email them asking for help, and they won't respond. And that's retribution for speaking out. But what else am I supposed to do? When I see things that are happening that aren't right, you have to say something. Like you said, if I hadn't spoken out, all you would be seeing is articles about this poor, wrongfully convicted man. And that's all you would see. And a point is that there is a case possibly to be made for his innocence, but it wasn't conducted correctly. If he's truly innocent, bring out all the evidence to the judge, all of it, and let's let her decide. But the way this was handled, with all the evidence omitted, with the family members thrown off to the side, things like that, it just wasn't conducted correctly, regardless of his guilt or innocence. And that's just not right.
And like you said, that's not really justice. That's interesting. So like if all the evidence was on the table and the full picture was there, you'd be a lot more comfortable with the entire process, even if it had a result. Because it sounds like what you're saying is you really want justice regardless of who it was, that you're not so wedded to the idea that it needs to be him, but you are wedded to the idea that there needs to be justice.
Right. Like if the DA's office had the stance that, we believe he's innocent, and they conducted this investigation, thorough investigation and all that, then I really wouldn't have any qualms with them. Difference of opinion, but they're doing what they believe is right for justice. But what I saw, their actions, their investigation, it just was not on the up and up. And, that's why I started speaking out.
I'm glad you did, and I'm glad you have the courage to put your voice out there. So let me just thank you again, and I really appreciate your time. And, hopefully at some point we'll be able to have another conversation once this has moved further in the process. But thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For ad-free early episodes and deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, you can also join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again next week.